Hi, everyone. This is Rochelle Rizzi with Vrai, and I'm here today with Robert Glazer, who is the author of this amazing book called Elevate. I'm super excited to bring him to the table. He's also the founder and CEO of a global performance marketing agency called Acceleration Partners. I want to allow Robert to talk a little bit about himself, and he has some really amazing tips for us during this time, really useful for any crisis. But as leaders, whether we're working for someone else, showing up for our families, showing up in our communities, it's just, I just found this book completely invaluable. So thank you, Robert, and welcome to the table.
Thanks for having me. My story, I've been growing a business called Acceleration Partners for the last 13 years. That for me is a little bit been the sort of laboratory for personal and professional growth, and needing to continue to elevate myself in order to qualify for the job of leading the organization, as it has grown from a handful of people to over 170 now in I think we're in about 7 or 8 different countries. So just even that process of building capacity, understanding kind of who I was as a leader, which was underwrapped in who I really was as a person and what drove me, like all of that's been really wrapped into my sort of personal and professional experience in the last decade. And a lot of the stuff that I sort of figured out for myself, based on a lot of best practices, nothing that I sort of invented. You know, we have used that as a sort of leadership development playbook for our team in terms of helping them understand themselves, their values, what drives them. And that's really been the basis for sort of capacity building and how we've grown the company. So I think we're sort of a company that's an experiment in using capacity building to continue to grow, and we're not venture back. So it's not like we're just growing because we're losing money. We're growing because our people are getting a lot better and they're doing amazing stuff, and that's allowing the organization to grow. But as part of that, you know, the key turning point for me was really becoming clear on the values. I started this newsletter called Friday Forward. It wasn't even called Friday Forward at the time, but to my team, and it ended up sort of blowing up and now goes to a couple 100,000 people every week across the world. And Elevate happened. Actually, the book I originally intended to write is the book that's coming out this fall, which was sort of a compilation. But what happened was, years ago, I didn't really have the same sort of platform. I had these stories, and I went to a bunch of agents around this compilation of a bunch of these stories, and they said, no, you need like a real book. And so when I started to sit down and look at what had I done in my life, why were these Friday Forwards resonating with all these people, what we're doing with our company, it was all the same pattern of capacity building. And I was actually able to trace the Friday Forwards to really being in that capacity building. And so what I've done with the new book that's coming out called Friday Forward is taken like 52 of the best ones and organize them around the capacity building framework, so that people are trying to lean into it and want to hear the stories and examples, kind of have some of those real world stories. Because after 5 years of writing these every week, most people aren't going to find the ones from 4 years ago. But probably similar to musicians, it may be that the best one I wrote is like 4 years old, and that the newer stuff may not be as good. It just may be more widely known.
I love hearing how we all evolve as people and leaders.
Well, it's interesting. I shelved that book, but actually now the time for that book is really right. And so it also proved to me that there's sort of a time for everything. Like, it was talk to the publisher, and it was really easy to just kind of like dust that off and bring it back. And I said, oh, well, now it has the framework. So now it goes really well with, like, if you really are trying to understand, you know, how to improve your spiritual capacity, like, you know, here's not going to divide the weeks correctly. Here's 16, stories that really talk about that.
Yeah. So is it like a modern day like soup for the soul kind of thing, or like talk a
I
little bit
always joke
about.
around that that actually started Friday Forward because, well, I super appreciate chicken soup for the soul. Like a lot of the rainbow and unicorny stuff that is not for me. Like my form of like motivation, inspiration has a little bit of pain, in it. And even in the Friday Forwards, the end question sometimes is a little bit of a gut punch or gets people to think. Like that's sort of what works for me, which is like, stories that push and challenge you. There's a formula in Elevate that I talk about. A friend of mine who's worked in Malik Muhammad, who's worked in like tons of at-risk youth and social services, and that is change equals connection plus challenge. And so I actually, when I saw that, I realized that there's a lot about Friday Forward, like connect with the people and then challenge them. The stuff more in the rainbow and unicorny isn't a challenge thing. It's kind of a here's a happy story. And I think sometimes the people that seems a little like disconnected. So look, they've sold a lot more books than I have, and I appreciate that stuff and I like it. I like the stuff that pushes you a little more.
Well, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I think it really resonates with the readers and your followers, I'm sure your clients and your team for sure. But when we share as leaders that we've come out of something, that we've
Yeah.
survived something, that bad stuff happens. Sometimes it's in our
Bad stuff
control,
is
sometimes
happening
it's not.
right now. Yeah, a lot of it.
I know I could talk all day about the things and the mistakes that I made and the horrible things I've been through as an entrepreneur, and otherwise. So what would be one thing that you're comfortable sharing from a vulnerable leadership standpoint
Yeah.
that drives you to share your story?
Yeah, and I allude this into the book, but I think a lot of us are trying to. I've written one on this in the last year on sort of purpose and pain, and as I help a lot of people figure out their core values and stuff, I've learned to draw a direct line for most people between some of their core values and sort of formative life experiences, often childhood experiences, right? They're really driving very strongly towards something that was important to them or against something that frustrated them. And oftentimes, like, it's right there for people, but they just don't see the connection. And in listening to their story for like 2 minutes, it's like I try to walk them there a little bit because it's like glaring to me. I shared the story recently of a friend who I always just kind of ask the one or two more questions I've learned to do, who was talking about how her husband called her like the marriage whisperer, and he said, as soon as you can tell that there's like a problem with the marriage, there's a problem with the marriage soon. So he was kind of calling her the angel of death on like people's marriages. And I thought that was like really interesting. And so I asked her, I'm like, and so, I don't know what we're talking about. Tell me about like your parents or whatever. And she's going into the story about how her dad sort of left her mom with no notice, and just kind of walked out of their life and all that stuff. And I asked her, I was like, did you connect maybe that, the fact that like you were blindsided kind of as a child by your dad, and now you're very, very in tune to sort of situations that are out of whack. And I thought she was going to say, well, of course, but like I saw this kind of like look of shock for her, in that. And I've seen this play over and over and over again in these discussions. And I'll usually say to someone, you don't have to answer this, but let me ask you this question. And the question will be about something I heard in their story and the connection. And oftentimes they'll ask it. So, I mean, I'm no different. I was a very creative, ADD kid who, struggled in school. And the most common thing, and I don't mean struggle, like not terrible, but I just didn't fit in well to the traditional environment. The most common thing written on every report card that I had every year was, he's very capable of doing well. He could do better. So I don't even like going to parent-teacher conferences to my kids these days, who are like straight A students, the older two, the younger one, TBD. But because I just have bad memories of always being told like, kind of, you have potential, but you're not doing well. And the truth was I just wasn't interested in the stuff that I was learning, and I underachieved for a long time from that. So, once I figured all of this out, I mean, I'm very passionate about helping people to figure out what's their gift? What do they do well? How do they figure out how to lean into that? Tune out the rest, because I there's some embarrassment for me that still I'm probably an overachiever to a fault now, and exhaust myself for some trying to make up for time that I won't make up, and I actually need to do a better job of kind of letting myself off the hook on some of that stuff, because I drive myself into the ground with some things.
Right. When we think other people are expecting so much of us, that as high achievers, we overachieve to the point of exhaustion. So,
I exhaust
and that's,
myself, my family, my friends. But
yeah,
if you went in my yearbook and you went up to 20, I was never described as an overachiever. Like it was probably the opposite. And I get frustrated with my kids at things I realize that I'm frustrated. Maybe I'm probably frustrated at the 14-year-old version of me more than I'm frustrated about them about it.
sure. Yeah. And I have 4 children, so I can relate to that. And you have to, just like a team at the office,
Yeah.
you motivate them all differently, you discipline them all differently. And I say discipline in the terms of employment differently than you would your
Yeah.
children. But it all comes down to motivating and figuring out what are the drivers for them,
Right.
because they're not us, and we can't. What motivates me, I learned the hard way, does not motivate the team. You have to dive into those individual personalities, their learning types. And I know that you've spoken to a lot of groups over the last several weeks, and you told me that you have sort of a presentation you've been working on, and you
Yeah.
have some kind of core tips. Why don't you go ahead and dive into some of those? Because I think that it bleeds
Yeah.
well
So,
into capacity, core values, things like that.
yeah. So Elevate's organized around the 4 elements of capacity building, which I think are the basis of all self-improvement, which is spiritual, which is kind of who are you, what are your values; intellectual, which is what is your operating system, how do you learn, plan, be accountable, have discipline; physical is your health and wellness; and emotional is your relationship to other people and things that you don't control. So if I think about that through a COVID lens, I actually think for a lot of people, think about all the people that have career changes when they get kind of laid off, like they're kind of skating along, and it's not until someone forces them or takes away the sort of okay that they figure out the thing. I think we're going to have a ton of people have sort of existential moments over the next couple months and years. They might lose their jobs, change careers, decide they don't even like what they're doing. Understanding and being able to articulate your personal core values is like the most important thing you can do in life, because it's your best decision-making rubric. Things about like, where do I work? Who do I marry or, partner with? Where do I live? These are all like decisions that if are not in alignment with your core values, don't go well. Most of us know them, but I always say, like, we know them by feel, but it's kind of like bumper car. The car's driving through the tunnel and it like hits off the side of the wall, and then you go hit the other wall. So you get through the tunnel, but your car's pretty smashed up. If you have your core values articulated and on your desk, it's like you turn on the light and you paint the lanes, and like the car gets through the tunnel without all the damage. That's what I always go back to. And I think right now for a lot of people, there are no easy decisions. There are hard decisions and probably harder decisions. In the same way people had to make a decision of like, who gets a ventilator when you don't have enough, you need to have a core value rubric. You need to have a hierarchy that tells you like, here's what I value most and here's what I can sleep with. We all have those really hard decisions coming, and I keep saying to my team, you put off the hard ones right now, you will only have really hard ones. So you better be really clear on your values hierarchy when you make those, because they're not easy decisions, and you need to sort of sleep at night. And I think a lot of us will have these sort of existential decisions that we'll look back on in 5 or 10 years and really be like, wow, I stayed true to myself, or, that was my biggest regret. So that's spiritual. Intellectual to me is like, I was talking about, it's like your operating system. Like, we can get smarter. We don't come smart or not smart. And I actually think the best thing that the education system, I was thinking today, like, I wouldn't remember 95% of like anything that I was taught in school. Like I'm probably worse than, most people, but really what the system should be doing is teaching us to love to learn rather than all this memorization, because that's not how the world works. But if we love to learn, we're finding new solutions. Like the businesses now that are learning the fastest and the people that are adapting are winning, right? If you saw your restaurant close and you just threw in the towel, it was the guy yesterday who's built this whole delivery business off of his high-end deli a few towns away, where he drops it off every night for people and we order it and we give him a check. And he just pivoted. He learned what he had to do. He figured it out. He set up the stuff and he's like, look, it's not where we were, but it's keeping all my people employed. It's keeping us, going forward. The people that are learning fastest now are winning, both personally and professionally. They're not focused on January 2020, because you and I talked about, like, that's not coming back. That may never come back. Like, we come out of this and it's not normal. It's a new normal. So if you're not willing to learn and adapt, you're going to struggle. Look, physical, I mean, there's probably nothing health and wellness right now. A lot of us are on our quarantine. There's a meme going around saying your alcoholic quarantine name is your first name plus your last name. That's gotten a bunch of laughs. But look, we're home. We're having a lot of ice cream. We're drinking. We're stressed. We're not sleeping. Like, it actually doesn't help your performance. And I think physical capacity is more important now than ever, because to get through the difficult times, you need to be in good shape. And you're seeing this in the difference in the rates in countries that are healthier and versus not healthier, and sort of the impact that has, even if you do get sick. So I think it's more important than ever to sleep well, keep your stress low, don't burn the midnight oil. It's put your oxygen mask on first so that you can help other people. And in emotional, I talk about something in the book, and the notion of energy vampires. So people who in your circle, literally, like, you're more tired, after you talk to them. These would be the people before who were kind of, they're the victim, they're the blamer, they're the narcissist. Like, you just don't want to be around them. Well, I can tell you, like, if they were negative in your life before you entered COVID, these people are likely to be now, like, pulling you underwater and drowning you. So it is more important than ever to, like, create space from these energy vampires. And I got a great tip from a well-known guy named Donda Pandey, he's a Hindu priest. He was a Buddhist monk, and he sort of introduced me to the concept of energy vampires. But he talked about just not having to, like, have breakups with these relationships, but just, like, moving your energy. Just don't call, don't ask the question, spread it out. Like, you can very slowly kind of remove your energy from relationships that drain you. And that's kind of been a life-changing lesson for me. And I think right now more than ever, like, look, there's not a lot of good news, certainly on the news or elsewhere. If you're getting on the call with a friend and or family, and they're making you feel worse, like, it's like CNN. You got to turn that off, because you just, at some point, it's just going to bring you down along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't think about the news as an energy vampire. But I am so much more at peace when I'm not watching it. Because frankly, from day to day, the news doesn't really change right now. It's maybe week to week there's an update.
Yeah, only there's Some Good News channel, that he's running that's good. Every time I have talked to someone in this crisis who looks at a physical or mental breaking point, and I sort of do a postmortem with them, they are either exhausted, they haven't slept, or they have been watching the news, like, way too much that day. I remember having my 9/11 moment. I watched it for 2 days. And at one point I looked and I was just, like, hysterically crying watching it. And I was like, I'm done. And I turned it off for a couple of days. Everyone who's told me they have gone on a news diet has been so much happier. Like, you know what? Stuff's happening. I'm going to go on a hike with my kids and just not watch about, like, all these people fight and argue and talk about how bad it's going to be. Like, that, not super helpful for my psyche.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean we don't care about what's going on out there, but it is the oxygen mask for us to not participate in the extra worry.
And
You
there's
know,
very little, right? And there's very little like news anymore. Like it is news plus layers of political opinion and sort of blaming. And so it's not like there's a ton of things that I look at every day. I look at the Worldometer site, the counters, the data. Like I want to see the trends. Like I want to be informed. But the problem with all spectrums of news is that it is not just objective news. It is a story, and fear sells.
yeah, the data though is important for us to know,
Very
but that's
important.
what I mean. Like if I check it every week, I'm good. I don't need to check it every day because it's the bigger incremental change.
Yeah,
And I'm looking for answers. That's what I find myself just looking for answers. Are the kids going to play baseball this summer?
yeah,
Summer camps canceled. Do we have school again? Can I get back? Can I have my office back by myself?
yeah. I mean, I pull up the counter sites. I look at a few states and cities and countries because everyone's trying different approaches, and I'm looking at the data to see like who's right. I think the winners get to write history, right? And so what seems dumb now may be brilliant, or what seems brilliant may be dumb. Like we don't know, and so that's what I'm looking for. Like it's interesting right now. Like in New York's cases are declining almost as fast as they went up, the city, but you don't hear people really talking about that.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, the news is driven, the ratings maybe are driven by all the negative
Yes.
stuff,
Yeah.
right? We're looking for the drama. I
Yeah.
would prefer no drama right now. I have enough.
Exactly.
I think you had a couple more points you wanted to talk about. I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, I don't remember where I was. So.
um, well, I think the other thing in talking about how to inspire ourselves, how are we to inspire others? That was another point I think that you can really hit home.
Yeah, a lot of it, I never would have believed this kind of simple email could have had such an impact. But I think there's just a ripple effect of when you work on yourself, right? If, let's say you're someone who's in a family or you're in an organization, and you're suddenly figuring out what you want, making better decisions and learning quickly and, running and physical health and then better relationships. Like that pulls others along either into a vicarious or a vicious sort of circle of climbing with you, or you can sink them. So a lot of times it's not just even what you say, it's what you do. And I really think people, they notice that, they take example. I come back from a 5-mile run yesterday, and then my wife goes, I haven't run, but I saw him run. Like, so now she runs today. So you either lift each other up or you knock each other down, and we've got plenty of knocking each other up down these days. It actually requires so much less energy to just lift someone up. I'm amazed at some of the people I've run into over the year who seem to spend their whole life trying to make other people feel bad. And I'm sure it comes out of something of their childhood where someone made them feel bad, but it's just a terrible way to live and use your energy.
I couldn't agree with you more. I really think that it takes less energy to be joyful
Or
and
neutral.
or neutral. But I think it takes so much energy to stay angry.
Yeah.
I think you have to make a really conscious effort to stay angry and almost convince yourself that angry is the right way to go. I am a natural optimist. I try to lift people up around me. I am also a natural empath, so I feel
Yeah.
everything around me. And that can be a struggle as a leader to show up anyway, right? To show up
Yeah.
and be human. And I've learned, that vulnerable leadership is kind of our buzzword, over the last couple of years, thanks to
Yeah.
Brene Brown, and I do love her. And I've read every single one of her books. But it does give you a safe place to be human as a leader while also being strong. Because we do absorb a lot as employers, community leaders, and of course, if we're parents, trying to lead all of that simultaneously. Taking a 5-mile run, if you're a runner, is a great way to clear your head.
Yeah, like I actually don't like running, but I love the effect it has on me. So I like trick myself into running with podcasts. Like they say you have to like the practice. Like I actually don't like it, but it really
helps me. Like it's definitely burns off. I'm less stressed. So I've made that association. And look, a lot of the anger comes from not willing to look, within. I think I wrote about this in the Friday Forward, last week. But there's some stuff we don't control, but we're all kind of abdicating the things that we do control. So there's definitely a lot of people, living paycheck to paycheck in the U.S. and just struggling to make ends meet. And this is kind of like, there's no good option, for them in this, and that they can't work. But there are others, 25% of people in the US who make $150,000 have no savings, right? So these are just people living beyond their means, buying stuff they don't need, leasing cars. I mean, there's no way you should not be able to have savings earning $150,000 based on your lifestyle choices. But then when you run into a problem or something like this, like, why are we angry at other people? Where's our own responsibility in this? Like we talked about winter, like in the old days, you knew winter was coming. And if you didn't save up food for winter, you wouldn't eat. So these things happen, like economic things go in cycles. So when you get, 10 great years and one bad year, that's a pretty good ratio. It's your responsibility during the 10 great years to get for yourself ready for the one bad one, not to pretend like you only get good and you never get bad.
Yeah, that's really incredible advice. I've never heard it said that way. And I'm really thinking about that because we think about our savings, we think about systems, we think about having the right people on the bus. We don't necessarily think about why we're doing that other than to keep investing. We're not thinking about the what happens if we don't.
We've had discussion with our team over the years. Hey, well, why do we have this profitability? Why don't we pay all of this out to people? And I said, look, there's growth capital. There's a rainy day. I don't hear any of those discussions anymore. We always talked about like, we're playing for the long run. Things, won't be good, but it's just so tempting. People almost take the same approach in business. Like, oh, it's a good, why don't we empty the savings account, while it's good. You're actually probably better historically filling the savings account when it's good and emptying when it's bad, because your money will buy you a lot more. A lot of people have made their fortunes in sort of having the ability to invest when it was bad versus, investing when it was good.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I hope people really listen to that because, again, it's oxygen mask on first for yourself, for your business, and making sure that you're really paying attention to that.
Yeah, when I syndicated that post on LinkedIn, I actually expected like a lot more negative comments because it was pretty strong. Again, that challenge, like winter comes, if you don't prepare for it, whose fault is that? And actually, I got all positive feedback from people who said, I really thought about this. I reflected on this a little bit. I actually did not get, there's always an angry person who somehow finds whatever message that I said, like they are definitely like motivational messages, but they find some way to bend it to their narrative. But I was actually pretty surprised that either people agreed with it or they said it really made them reflect on, like kind of like how much responsibility they bear and what are they going to do differently when they, come out of this. I mean, we don't save anymore. Like even the car companies now are offering people, 0% financing for 8 years. Like you should not have an 8-year car loan. It's a depreciating asset. I will tell you right now, I'm not a finance guru, but if it takes you 8 years to pay off your car, you can't afford it because that's by the time you pay it off, the car is worth 90% less. It is very different than borrowing money for an asset that stays value or goes up in value. Financing a depreciating asset is not a super smart financial decision.
Right. Well, and it gets you to ask the questions why, about all things, right? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why am I surrounding myself? Why am I listening to this? Why am I allowing myself to be judged or feel judged about anything? Sometimes when we buy something flashy, I hope people aren't doing it just to make an impression on someone else, because at the detriment of your family and the livelihood of longevity of financial decisions, don't buy things you can't afford. It's
or again, you can afford them at the time, but can you afford it if you lose your job? The article talks about people have lost their job for 1 to 2 months and half of America is not paying rent. So something is out of whack here that, that people can't survive 1 month. I mean, that's in the most prosperous country in the world. Like, that is a fundamental problem. There's a large percentage of people who honestly, they are at the minimum wage. They have a medical, like there's some real emergency, like, and really no fault of their own. They're just trying to kind of move up the ladder. But for the most prosperous company in the world to have everyone in financial ruin, after 30 days, like that's on us, not more than it is on third parties.
Well, one of the drivers for me of having these kinds of conversations is to save entrepreneurs from themselves, to not make the same mistakes that I've made, because I made many. I was an entrepreneur at a very young age for a solid 12 years into that before I had to make a really major pivot for both personal and financial reasons, mostly personal, but it drove these huge financial decisions for me. And I really got caught up looking back. Hindsight is 2020. But looking back, as I grew my own marketing agency, there was a pressure to keep growing. Banks saying, "Oh, you've reached this certain level. Now we'll lend you more money so that you can keep growing. You can take on more people. You can acquire this other business." I mean, whatever it is, I've done acquisitions and mergers and had great success and huge
growth for growth's sake. Yeah, we've fallen victim to that.
Oh yeah, and it's easy to do, but getting back to, if you have a clear vision and you can make these concerted efforts to stay focused on your decision-making model, it's just so important to not task switch all the time. Stay focused day to day, month to month, quarter to quarter, surround yourself with the right people, build your capacity smartly, and not just growth for growth's sake.
Yeah, and look, the problem is, it's what rewards, the system rewards. We talked about, we met at Small Giants, they're celebrating a very different type of thing. Like the Inc. 500, just celebrates top line revenue growth, not longevity, not profitability, not, is 90% of that. You run a credit card company and you get 1% of that, like, and people really celebrate. I remember I was really excited when we first got on that. And then years later, like, I just stopped applying for it. I'm like, I appreciate when we're recognized as a great place to work or whatever, but just because we grew up top line, I'm not sure that that's the measure of success of a business. And be interesting to see like what that list looks like, from last year to this year, since oftentimes the people growing the fastest are losing the most money.
Yeah. And for small businesses, when the owner's not paying themselves, and because there's no profit or they didn't set it up, then the company has no value.
Yeah.
If Bo Burlingham talked about—
I've had a lot of those discussions. People want us to buy their business, and I give you it's $1 million revenue business, and it nets out, 150, which is the market value salary of the person who's running it, who's the head of sales and operations and whatever. And like, look, you own a job. Like, there's no actual value to your company because you're playing these roles. That's only profit if that's what's after, you play the roles that you're filling.
Exactly. And I learned that the hard way too.
Yeah.
Because when I went to sell, I sold an event venue. It was a profitable sale. And I say that with a big heart right now, because I know they're struggling due to COVID, having to cancel all these events. There's so many people in the hospitality industry that are close friends of mine, and my heart just breaks for them. Yeah. With the agency, there was no book value. I learned that, like, here I was, over $1 million business, no book value. I wasn't paying myself enough, and just throwing everything into the infrastructure and the salaries of my people. It's not sustainable. You have to take care of yourself.
I remember, I tell this story a lot, being at a CEO group that I was at, where there was a member leader. And a lot of the member leaders in these things tend to not like their business, and they get overly involved with the leadership in the group because it's more fun than business. And the person's telling me about their business, and they've flown up from another state to oversee this meeting for a nonprofit, and their business that they own 100% of has lost money the last 3 years. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, what? So you're like writing a check every year to be in business? Like, and I understand the different motivation, but you'd be better off not doing anything financially than, writing a check every year. And I was like, what? You shouldn't be here giving advice to you should be back there, saving your business. And it's funny, I saw that a lot in different entrepreneurial groups where people, entrepreneurs are very distracted and whatever, and they're volunteering and they're running all these events as their business is like bleeding money. And I never understood it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you're smarter than the rest of us.
Maybe I learned it faster. I never believed in losing money. That's been a core principle I've always carried.
I think the thing is we don't see it that way because we weren't well versed enough in the we weren't paying attention to the numbers. For me, I mean, I ran into everything from trusting the wrong people to not
that happens a lot.
Checks and balances for reports. But, this go around, it's different. I have to learn those hard knocks lessons. And I have an MBA and they don't teach you that. They don't teach you.
Well, what they don't teach you is like, how do you trust your bookkeeper or not trust your bookkeper, right? I've heard plenty of that story. Entrepreneurs are very trusting.
Yeah.
They're either micromanagers or overly trusting. They need to be somewhere in the middle.
Well, and, to wrap this up, I guess what I'm thinking too is, we have to surround ourselves with the right people, have the right advisors. I didn't. I can say that. Like I didn't have the right, from legal to accounting to whomever. They didn't have the right growth mindset, and they didn't have the right experience to have my best interest in mind, which then affected my team, my company, my family.
Yeah.
And for a stint, the community lost a leader, which was me. I had to completely step back from all my volunteering things just to preserve. And I think it goes back to personal accountability, which, driving back to your book, Elevate, I love these action steps that you have in it.
That's been the most popular part of the book. I could have just written an 8-page book and I would have been good.
No, you have all these free resources in here. I just think it's fantastic. And I told you before we got on the call that I purchased some of these books and gave it to my sons. They're 14 years old, so they're getting ready to go into high school. We did little goodie bags, and I included this book because I thought whether they read it now or not, and listen, I have a teenager, I'm not sure he's cracked it open yet, but I want them to know that these are little things that it's the little nuggets of knowledge and self-love, and the quotes in here are just awesome. It's really well thought out. I think it's very inspirational. So what is the name of your next book, did you say?
The name is actually Friday Forward. That's the title. And I'm embarrassed I won't get the subtitle right, so I'll put it up here. But it's inspiration and motivation to end your week stronger than it started. Okay.
And your current Friday Forward, is that something everybody can sign up for?
Yeah, everyone can sign up at robertglazer.com. And there's just a tab for Friday Forward right there, and you can join the list, keep it growing.
Great. I will be sure to list that as a resource. And I can't speak enough for how grateful I am that you were able to talk to me today and share your talents and your wisdom with everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.